Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of January. As usual, I'm going to go from least favorite to most favorite, and we're going to start with some of the books that I DNF'd this month because there were a couple. The first book I DNF'd this month was All Hallows by Christopher Golden. This book came out on January 24th. I had an arc of it, so I was reading it a little bit before the release date of it as well, and I apologize to this book. I just could not get into it. This is supposed to be a story. I think it said it had Stranger Things vibes. I might be confusing that with another book, but I feel like this was the one it was talking about. And it's set in this small town suburb, and it's Halloween, and there's a family that's putting together a Halloween party, and there's kids who are gonna like trick or treat, and there's kids who are like teenagers who are gonna hang out, and it's their last summer before college, and it was just so suburban. I was ready to get to more spooky things. I don't remember exactly how much I read of this, but at least like the first 30% of the story, and it was just wordy and it was taking time to get into, and it was just not what I was looking for, not what I was in the mood for. Sometimes I really appreciate a slower paced world building, character building type of horror story, but this month I DNF'd a couple of them. I just was not in the mood for that this month. This is probably not a bad book. I'm sure people are gonna enjoy this and have a lot of fun with it. For me, it feels like something I would enjoy more as like a TV show, watching and getting to know these characters. I did think the writing was good, the characters were coming to life, but it was just personally not what I was in the mood for. And that's what I'm trying to carry into 2023, is not spending time on books that I'm just not in the mood for, and it's totally okay. And I don't feel bad about it. I just didn't want to read this book. I've never read from Christopher Golden before either. This was my first book from him, so I wasn't sure what to expect with his writing style, and I've heard good things about a couple other of his books, and I've started to see some reviews of this one come out as well that seem to be positive, so I might try this again sometime when I'm in the mood for something slower paced. I would maybe try it if there was an audiobook. I feel like that's hard sometimes with arcs when you don't have the audiobook, because for me, if I'm kind of struggling to get into a book, I'll put the audiobook on in the background while I'm doing something else for a little bit to see if I listen to an hour of it, am I liking it better? I just couldn't do that with this one, so maybe I'll revisit it someday, maybe I won't, but this month it was not the time for this book in my life. Second book I DNF'd this month, It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. I have a long extending history with Colleen Hoover. I was reading her books back when she was still indie, back when she was first writing Slammed and the Maybe Someday books. Like, I was with her in the beginning. I have read every single book she's published, whether it's indie or with a publisher. So at this point, I just feel like I'm so deep in the lore that I have to keep reading new books when they come out, but this is the one that I finally put a stop to it, and I said, you know what, I'm DNFing this, and I will not be picking up more books from her unless I'm actually interested in them, because the past like 5 or 6 books that she's come out with, I haven't even been interested in. I just read them because I'm like, it's a Colleen Hoover book and I have to read it, but I'm not gonna make myself do that anymore. There was nothing particularly wrong with It Starts With Us. I was just not in the mood for it. It was pretty boring, and I just didn't feel like it was a story that I needed. I have very fond memories of It Ends With Us when I read that when it first came out. I remember that being an important book for me personally. I know there have been a lot of opinions that have come out about that book in recent years as it's blown up on TikTok. I definitely didn't think it was a good idea to do a coloring book around it when they tried to launch that a couple weeks ago. I was very glad that got put down pretty quickly because that seemed really strange. But I can't really speak on It Ends With Us now because it's been so long since I read it. I don't know what my experience would be like if I read it today. I don't know what my experience would be like if I read any of the Colleen Hoover books I enjoyed 10 years ago today. All I know is when I was reading It Starts With Us, I was just bored with the writing. This is the follow-up to It Ends With Us, and it picks up exactly where It Ends With Us ends. I did watch a recap video to try to refresh myself on what happened in It Ends With Us, and I also like kind of flipped through the book a little bit to get caught up in my memories, and I don't know, I just didn't feel like I needed to see these characters anymore. That book was important for me when it was, and I don't need It Starts With Us now. And the third book I DNF'd this month was Episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. I did read 50% of this book. It was just not pulling me in, and I even listened to the audiobook for it as well. If you're gonna read this book, I definitely recommend the audiobook if you can. This is a story that follows this TV crew who does this reality ghost hunting TV show, and they're going to this place that they think is going to be really haunted for the 13th episode of their show, where back in the 70s there were these awful experiments being done on people, and they think that there's a lot of lingering spirits in this house. The story is told entirely in mixed media, which I did not know going in, but you're reading a lot of journal entries, script writing. There's even a page that's just like the shots the camera gets. So it's a lot of just piecing together things. There's parts that are text messages and emails, and there's never just a point where you're just reading like a third person narrative of what's happening in the story. You're only getting all of these little bits to try to piece together what's going on. And it wasn't hard to follow by any means, but it just wasn't creating a full picture for me. I just wasn't really engaged in it. I wasn't feeling like I was going to care about anything that happened to the characters, and I like to be able to care about my characters. So I ended up setting this one down. I'll be interested to see what more people say about it. It was my first Craig de Louis, so I don't have anything to compare it against for that. But it's also just kind of long, and it felt like it was going really slow, and I just wasn't really engaged in it. So I decided to set it down. Now going into my 1-star reads for the month. I don't always rate books, but this month I had 2 books that were 1 star very clearly to me. The first one is I Know Who You Are by Alice Feeney. I've never in my life got as many messages on Instagram as I did when I posted about reading this book and my reaction to the ending of it. It was horrible, horrible. The entire premise of this book is you're following this woman named Amy who comes home one day and her husband is missing, and she becomes the prime suspect. You're also getting these flashback segments and trying to figure out how that pieces together with the story. Very basic domestic thriller setup. It was a fine time while I was reading it and getting through. It's just a really kind of boring and repetitive book because you just keep reading what feels like the same things over and over and over again, but it was feeling like it was just gonna be fine. And then we got to the ending of this book and the explanation behind what was going on, and I was appalled. It just went a really not great direction. It was just really gross, and then it went even further than it even needed to go with like the last little bit of the story. It was just all in all a terrible experience, and I had a very weird journey with Alice Feeney. The first book I read from Alice Feeney was Rock Paper Scissors, and I loved it. It was 5 stars. I had so much fun with it, and everything else that I've read since then seems to keep going downhill. I thought Daisy Darker was fine. I think I ended up giving that one a 3-star. That was her most recent publication. Still didn't love the writing style of it. I just think she writes in all of this like flowery prose where it just feels like she's writing a lot of cliches and just statements about life. It just spends so much time saying like, this is what it is to be in a marriage, and marriages are this, and life is this. And I'm like, let's just get the plot, you know? Let's not bury it in all of these just statements about what life is like. I keep noticing that more and more the more I read from her. I only have, I think, 1 more book in her backlist, which is Sometimes I Lie, which everyone says is the best one. So I think I'm still gonna have to read it, but it will be a library book. I will not be purchasing that one. Yeah, I really did not enjoy this. Really don't recommend it. The second book I gave a 1 star was more out of disappointment factor and just feeling like the story didn't offer me anything, and that is The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. This is a story that follows these 2 women who are friends but also kind of frenemies, and they go to this Italian villa for the summer. Also interspersed in the story is flashbacks of what happened a long time ago when similarly this group of friends went to this villa and it ended in a murder. You go back and forth between the present and the past as one of the women in the present is piecing together what happened in the past that led to the murder, and they're also writers, and so she's writing some stories that she's being inspired from what has gone on in the past. It was just boring to me. This reads a lot more just like a historical fiction. It honestly kind of reads like something Taylor Jenkins Reid would write if you've read from her before, but it just was not a thriller. There was some mystery and there was a little bit of like a twist that happens in the story, but it just was not very exciting. And then right at the end, some things happen. I didn't love the direction it went, and it just felt very bland to me. I was going between reading this one on ebook and audiobook, and I was in a period where I was listening to the audiobook, and I looked down and all of a sudden I was 75% into the story, and I felt like absolutely nothing had happened so far. I was like, how am I this far in? Nothing has happened. I feel like people said the same thing about Reckless Girls, but I actually really enjoyed Reckless Girls, and I didn't understand why people said it was boring, and then I read this one, and now I feel like I see what people saw in Reckless Girls. So I'm very confused. I don't know where I stand with Rachel Hawkins. I'll probably still pick up the next thing she comes out with, but I'm gonna be a lot more hesitant about it. The next 2 books that I have to talk about in order are 2 books that were in the same reading blog. So that is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt and The Spite House by Johnny Compton. Both of these books were in the vlog vlog that I did where I was reading haunted house books. Tell Me I'm Worthless, I ended up not putting a rating on because I just didn't really fully get the book, and so I didn't really know how to rate it. And then The Spite House, I ended up giving a 3.5 star. So if you want to hear about both of these books in depth, you can check out that video, which I will have a link down below. But for a quick rundown of what they're about and my experience with them, Tell Me I'm Worthless is this story about these women who were friends and now they are frenemies. Back in the past, they spent a night together at a haunted house with another one of their friends, and the other friend did not get out, and now these two have been haunted ever since with what happened in the haunted house. They end up coming back together and deciding to return to the house together, and that is kind of the spiel for the story. This is a story that has a lot to say. There's a lot of social commentary packed into this one about trans rights and about fascism, and I just fully didn't piece together what it was trying to do. It is more abstract. It's written more like art. It is less straightforward. It is just something you can really dissect and spend a lot of time with. I did enjoy the experience of reading it, especially the first half. The whole time I was confused, but I liked being confused from the beginning, and by the end I was just confused and didn't really fully get it. But I've heard other people say really wonderful things about this book, and I did think the writing was really good, so it's definitely an author I would read from again. And then The Spite House is a story about this dad and his daughters who are going to this haunted house, and he is taking on a job to live in the haunted house and record any paranormal activity. It sounds like a crazy setup, but it's kind of one of his only options in life at this moment, and he is going to do anything he can to protect his girls, and he really needs to have this opportunity because they are also on the run from something that you do not understand. I thought this one was a really solid haunted house story. I loved the family connections and just this dad who will do anything for his daughters and the sisterly bond between them as well. Once you find out what's really going on in the story, it was even more interesting what was being weaved in, and I also learned what a spite house was by reading this book, which was a fun little element as well. Next up is The Getaway by Lamar Giles. This book was featured in a reading vlog I did where I was reading from 3 thriller authors for the first time, so you can see my full thoughts on this book in that vlog. This one is like a YA dystopian horror thriller mystery suspense, all of the things packed into one. It feels like one of those 5 minutes in the future type of stories where everything in the world is kind of going to shambles with poverty and climate change and inequity, and it's just all a mess everywhere, except there's this one place, Karloff Country, which is very heavily inspired by Disney, where you can live and be protected from everything that is going on out in the world, and it seems like this wonderful place to be. But pretty soon the cast of characters you're following, which is this group of teens who lives there, start to find out that things are not actually so nice in Karloff Country after all. I had a lot of fun with this one. It had a really cool concept to it, and I thought it was executed really well. The pacing did feel a little weird to me at times just because it felt like there was a lot happening in this story, like almost stuff that would span kind of a trilogy in the YA dystopian type of books that was compacted into one. But that might have just also been because it was my first time reading from this author and I wasn't sure what to expect, and maybe that's kind of their style. But either way, I had fun with it and I would definitely read from this author again. Another book I read in that video is The House in the Pines by Ana Reyes. This story I really enjoyed. I thought it had a nice atmosphere to it. I just loved the tone of it. I was really sucked into it and really intrigued to know what was happening. But apparently it has not been getting the best reviews lately, but also it was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, so maybe it's getting a mass audience reading it who doesn't typically like books like that and they're getting disappointed. I don't know, but I had a good time with it. In this story, you're following this woman named Maya, and when Maya was younger, her best friend died right in front of her. And now Maya is one day watching a YouTube video and she sees another young girl in a diner suddenly fall down and die. And the thing those deaths have in common is they were both around the same man when they died, and it's a man that's connected to Maya. So she feels compelled to dig into this, to discover this man from her past and to figure out what is going on where when he is around, young girls seem to drop dead. There's a lot of other elements going on in this story as well. There is this house in the pines, as the title suggests, which played a significant role in Maya's life regarding this man. There's also this element where she is exploring the history of her father and her Guatemalan roots. He was a Guatemalan man who was writing a book and he died before he could finish the book, and that plays a significant role in her journey as she's discovering what's going on. But all in all, I just thought it was a really beautiful story. It has this very haunting atmosphere and tone to it. It has a really cool element that's like the big twist or reveal, and it kind of reminds me of another book I read, but I feel like that would almost sort of give away the style of the book that it takes, so I don't want to give that away. But that book got really good reception and this one is apparently not. So I don't know, but I really liked it. If you like atmospheric, haunting, mystery thrillers, then I would definitely recommend picking it up. Next up is The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. I've been wanting to read from Sally Hepworth for a long time. She's just been an author that's been on my radar that I really wanted to check out, and I've owned this book for a long time because I actually picked it up at a bargain price at a Books A Million one time. And I actually started this book before. I was listening to the audiobook of it once when I was getting off of an airplane. I only listened to the first like 30 minutes and I just kept forgetting that I had this book sitting on my shelves, but I heard really good things about it, so I was excited to check it out and I ended up really liking it. In this story you follow two sisters, Fern and Rose. Fern works at a library and I don't know if it ever fully says if she is neurodivergent, but you definitely get a lot of the sense that she is, and you get clear moments where she has sensory issues to loud noises and lights and things, so that is a very big part of her character. And Rose feels like she really has to protect Fern in life, so they have dinners together all the time and Rose is always really involved in what's going on in her life. And Fern also really loves her sister and is also really involved in her life, and Fern one day discovers that her sister Rose is having trouble getting pregnant and Fern wants to solve that problem for her. She's like, if I can just find a man and get pregnant, I can get a baby to give to my sister Rose. And the story follows what happens from there. This is more of a general fiction suspense type story. It's not a thriller or mystery, although there are thrillery type elements to it and mystery type elements to it, but I feel like a general fiction slash suspense is probably the best categorization for it. What I loved about it was just the writing of it. I thought the characters really came to life off the page. I absolutely loved the dynamic between them and exploring what was going to happen and just having me at the edge of my seat the whole time. I read it so quickly. I just really enjoyed the story that Sally Hepworth built in this book. So I am super excited to read more from Sally Hepworth now. I'm so glad because she's been on my radar for so long, and I'm really glad that I really enjoyed the first thing that I read from her, and I will definitely be reading more. Next up is You Must Remember This by Kat Rosenfield. I've seen this book being called a Knives Out style whodunit, and I feel like that sets you up incorrectly for what you're going to get in this story. I did really enjoy this story and I do see the Knives Out-y type of elements, but that just really sets up the wrong expectation for what the story is. I also kind of wish the synopsis of this was written a little differently because I don't love what information it gives away in the synopsis, so I'm just going to pitch it to you the way I would like to pitch it to you. In this story you have two timelines, and the connecting point for the timelines is this woman named Miriam. Following her when she is a young teen slash young woman and when she's an 85-year-old woman. So you see what her life was like growing up, and then you also see what it's like as she is reaching the end of her life. And at the end of her life, she's having memory issues, she's got dementia, she doesn't always know where and when she is, and her family is gathering around. All her children and her grandchildren are coming together at this big Gothic house to celebrate Christmas together. Miriam has been in a nursing home, but she's coming here for the holidays and they're all going to spend the time together. And it does sort of have a Knives Out feel where you don't know if everyone's intentions are super pure or if some people are really interested in inheritance or what the family secrets and connections are. And then someone dies and you have to piece together the past and the present to understand the reasoning and the cause behind that death. So it's really a story about family secrets and piecing together the past. This book also gets compared to Taylor Jenkins Reid style writing, which I think makes sense as well. As a person who reads a lot of mystery thrillers, I did not find this book overly surprising, but I did really enjoy it for what it was, which is a story about family secrets and seeing people for who they really are and just how we rewrite our own histories. Next up is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. I really thought this book was going to be a 5-star. It was almost a 5-star, but it ended up being a lot about things that weren't super interesting to me with the direction that the mystery took, but the setup of it, the characters, just the general vibes of the book were impeccable. I absolutely loved it. If you like cozy murder mysteries and isolated settings with witty characters and a detective putting on his cap and trying to piece together what's going on, you're gonna love this book. The story is told from the perspective of this guy, Ern Cunningham, and what's happening is his family is all coming together for this family reunion at this resort in this snowy, isolated setting. As the title suggests, everyone in the family has has killed someone, and Ern is talking to you, the reader. He breaks the fourth wall a lot and is telling you the story of what's happened between his family, what's happened with him, and what's happening at this resort after a dead man shows up. I feel like this paired with You Must Remember This were both such good cozy January winter mystery thrillers. I just love these witty murder mystery type stories, and I'm really glad I found a couple new favorites this month. Like I said, this one does a lot of breaking of the fourth wall. It plays a lot of tricks with the readers. There's a lot of laugh out loud moments. I just thought it was so good. And I also listened to the audiobook as well, and I really recommend doing that if you can, because it really just brings the character's voice to life. There will be these moments in the beginning where he's telling you the story and he's like, I'm not gonna play any cheap tricks with you. Like, I'll tell you every page that a murder happens on. Someone's gonna die on page 67 and in chapter 32, and when you get to here, there's gonna be this. And it's so funny the way he just sets you up to experience this story. It was just really dynamic, really fun, and I highly recommend it. It's also the start of a series, and I never read series, but I will be picking up the next book in this one. Next up is one of my 5-star reads of the month, which was Foe by Ian Reid. I have a really good history with Ian Reid. I gave 4 stars to I'm Thinking of Ending Things, I gave 5 stars to We Spread, and I gave 5 stars to Foe. This is a story about this couple who lives out on this farm, and one day this man arrives with this interesting proposal telling the man that he is going to go on this mission to go to space. Part of the arrangement is also that his wife will not be left alone. She will be left with some familiar company. It's a super vague synopsis, but that's how Ian Reid stuff always is, and that is definitely the way to go into it. I was so intrigued with this book. It had such good writing, such good intrigue and suspense with trying to figure out what's going on. I did catch on to the twist reveal of this book, but I still really enjoyed it. It wasn't a book that I needed to be like this crazy shock moment for. I just really liked seeing how it was all going to play out. Ian Reid just has such clever writing. He just makes you think about life in different ways, and I just cannot wait for more books from him because they're all so good. And for another 5-star this month, we have The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. I read this one in the vlog that I did where I was reading authors for the first time, so you can check out that vlog to see my full experience and thoughts with this one, but it was just so surprising and such a fun ride. This is a darker, edgier thriller that takes some risks, and I really appreciate those types of thrillers. The setup from this one doesn't sound too unfamiliar. You're following this cast of women who are going off to this writing retreat. This really acclaimed author is opening this opportunity for a couple women to come and spend time at her place, and then we'll have this writing retreat, and she'll be critiquing their work and they'll be critiquing each other's work, and it seems like this really great once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But things at the retreat quickly turn into an absolute nightmare. If you read a lot of thrillers, that setup doesn't sound too unfamiliar. It doesn't sound too original from other things you typically read. If you like to read these locked room type mysteries where people go out and they get stuck in settings and bad things happen. But the direction this one took was just so much fun. And this is one of those like capital R ridiculous books. Don't take it too seriously. Don't think about it too much. Just go in and have a really fun time with it. It is such a page turner. It was so fun, and I can't wait to see more people reading it and talking about it because I think it's just gonna have a really interesting reception. And that is it for all the books that I read this month. It was a pretty good reading month. Had a couple of duds, but I did get a couple new early favorites, and I'm already thinking like, are these books gonna make it to be on my favorites of 2023 list? Will they survive the whole year staying at the top of my list? It's only the first month and I already had 2 5-stars. I just feel like it's setting a really good tone for 2023. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you think about them, or let me know if I've convinced you to pick any of them up. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!